Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the MotoGP Podcast. Lewis Duncan has joined me again. He's been away. I know some of you in the comments have been saying, "Where is he?" Don't worry, he's here.
Why?
People just wanted to know where you were, I think.
What's wrong with you? Crikey.
I tried to assure them, Lewis, that you were fine and you would be back. But yeah, I brought him back in, especially for this one, just so we could chat about the Dutch GP with Marc Marquez seemingly, on Friday looking like it was going to be a struggle, but then turns it into a perfect weekend of 37 points. And his brother is on the other end. His brother breaks a bone in his hand and he now has to fight back. And will he be back for Germany? The gap is up to 68 points in the World Championship. Marco Bezzecchi delivering for Aprilia again when Aprilia are in the headlines for the off-track stuff of Jorge Martin. It's a strange thing this keeps happening with Aprilia and Bezzecchi, that he keeps performing when they're getting all the attention outside the circuit. Bagnaia on the podium, I'd say, to where he kind of has been pre the real issues. He's getting back on the podium, but he still can't challenge Marc. A lot to dive into, Lewis. I suppose we can start with Marc and look at the Friday. I mean, I think they were both over 100 miles per hour, the crashes that he had. And I didn't think he would be, 100%, but the way he just kind of brushed it off from Saturday was truly impressive, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I said it. I think I said at the time that this championship is. You kind of feel like he gets into a predictable pattern, and then something happens that kind of turns it on its head. And we've seen that already. You look back to Austin and Jerez and Silverstone as well. Marc's been in dominant form, but we have seen that he's not invincible, and those crashes really were a stark reminder of the kind of the fine line that these riders walk. No matter how dominant you are, and the first one was a huge one. It was a really, really nasty one, and then the second one was an uncomfortable watch for a lot of people. But fundamentally, it wasn't as bad. But yeah, it had the potential to kind of knock his confidence. This is a circuit that's not Assen, not typically a strong one for him. It's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but it isn't one of his better ones. And I think there was a bit of a thought that there was maybe he was going to go into somewhat of a self-preservation mode. He did say on Thursday and then again on Friday. And even after the sprint, this is a weekend to not lose as much points. And if you look at kind of the way the pace was shaping up on Friday, it didn't work out as we kind of predicted in a way, because we saw Fabio Quartararo had really, really strong pace. We saw Alex Marquez was pretty decent. Even Pecco was right there with Marc, and it looked like and Bez as well. It looked like one of those weekends where maybe just he wasn't going to have it his own way, and he was going to throw the white flag and just ride safe because he's got a buffer. He had a 40-point buffer coming into the weekend. You can play about with that. You can lose some points here and there. It's not a drama. So the fact he's come out of this with 37 points, 3 weekends in a row now of perfect,
Yep.
That just highlights the level of Marc Marquez right now on that factory Ducati. He was run really hard in both races. Alex Marquez really put him under pressure in the sprint. Marco Bezzecchi was fantastic in the Grand Prix and really, really took it to Marc. If you actually look at the analysis of it, Marc exceeded track limits 3 times.
3 times. Yeah, that's right.
But Bezzecchi only did it once, and that's the kind of pressure that was being put under Marc. And Marc actually also set his fastest lap of the race on about lap 20, 26, whereas the others were a few laps earlier. So he was really, really having to be pushing a lot harder than maybe we've seen it at certain points this season. And to come away with that, to come through that, to extend the championship lead the way that he has done, albeit with a crash for his brother. Just now that we come to Sachsenring in a couple of weeks, where we know that's a stomping ground for him, the momentum is just fully with him now, and you just can't really see this championship going any other way. And that is full credit to a rider who is still in a lot of ways adapting to this bike and adapting his riding style. We've seen him make a lot of mistakes, and he's spoke about that and spoke about the way he has to manage it. And yet he does, he says, I need to do this, and then he does do it. And at 32 years old, with nothing really left to prove, that deserves a lot of credit, whether you like the guy or not. And this has been a topic of conversation this past week. You got bloody respect that, and And you can tell that the rest of these peers do. The way the riders speak about him and about racing him, you can tell that they know that they're going up against something really quite special here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the term that the younger crowd uses, that Mark has got aura. So he does. I think that's fair to say. He's got this aura about him, and Jack Miller actually touched on a podcast earlier in the year. He said you can sense it from him this year. He's got that different feel about him, and a few things that stood out to me. I'm kind of looking at the stats, and I was like, Mark has 15 wins this year if you combine sprint and Grand Prix. Alex Marquez is the closest, and he's 2. And you're like, it's just incredible. Like, Alex is the only person who's had multiple wins when you combine them. And it's like the adaptation thing you talked about, I think it was on display this weekend because he crashed his GP24 Aero spec on Friday, and then he was forced to use the new upgraded GP25 stuff, and he stuck with it the whole weekend then because he realised, oh, it's not too bad, it feels okay. I'm just going to keep using this because I've adapted to it. And he talked about that in the press conference after, and I was thinking, it just something so similar that other riders were unsure about. He was just like, fine, I'll use it and I'll just adapt to it, and he just wins both races on it. You're thinking it's little things there. You're like, he says, I'll go to Sachsenring now and I'll probably use the older stuff, but then I'll see what the new stuff's like. And it's just, he calculates things differently. He doesn't let anything, like a couple of crashes, get in the way. And yeah, it's that thing we've talked about before, that ability to reset and just get on with the job. And it's like, he just battered Bagnaia again this weekend, which I think, Bagnaia was probably his best weekend of the year personally, from start to finish. Obviously had the sprint race sort of woes with the fuel tank that he says it's just been there for the past 2 years now. And you're thinking, well, I thought Bagnaia would be closer today in the race, but then Mark just dealt with him no problem at the early phase. And as you say, Bez was the one that kept him on it. And I think that for Mark was just the impressive thing, because you visually could see yesterday in the sprint with Alex, he was so much faster in the last sector, but Mark placed his bike in a way where Alex couldn't overtake him in the fast bits. And then the last 2 corners, especially turn 15, he just, you could visually see on the camera the gap he would pull, and that's how the strength came through on the left. He tactically had them beat today, and it was something that was really impressive, Lewis, in terms of, you've had the comments about people, especially Alex, not overtaking him to say he's defending from Mark, but how can you when he's just in this mode that he's in where he knows the situation and he can defend? It's so difficult for the others, isn't it?
Well, this is it. There's only so much you can do, and I think one thing that kind of isn't really taken into account with this kind of criticism of Mark's rivals not racing him as hard, certainly Alex. These bikes are really difficult to race with. All the aero, the front tire pressure, it is harder to make cleaner overtakes. We saw this when this sprint era kind of came into being, was that you had so many crashes and stuff like that because everyone was panicked about tire pressures. Knew that it was difficult to overtake. So you had lots and lots of people doing really crazy things in the start of races. And that's when, we had all sorts of chaos, and it's calmed down a bit because they've realised that there really isn't much you can do. It's so much of it hinges on qualifying, and if you get ahead of a rival, then you are in the best position possible. Assen maybe is a circuit that highlights the troubles with overtaking on these bikes the most. You think back 6-7 years ago, you come to Assen, you'd have races, 2018 where you had 150 plus overtakes.
Yeah.
You can't have that anymore because it's a tight, fast track, and with the way these bikes behave in the wake of other motorcycles, it's really difficult to race, and therefore it's really difficult to set up a clean overtake. And fundamentally, Alex Marquez is going to approach racing Marc Marquez a little bit different. First and foremost, as Pecco's pointed out when he races the VR46 riders.
Yep.
You would, because there is that natural thing of, there is a different dynamic there, but he's not necessarily giving Mark an easier time because Alex is also a championship challenger. So if he makes a mistake overtaking Mark, hits Mark, crashes himself, Mark stays up, Alex loses points. So you can't make risky overtakes, and people can say, "Oh, well, Mark's dominant, Alex can take more risks, blah blah blah." When you've got when you had a 40 point gap coming into the weekend, and we've seen already this year how a gap for Marquez very, very quickly evaporated because of one mistake. You think back to Austin, Alex took the championship lead there, and again after Jerez, Alex took the championship lead there. Alex is smart enough to know that to be able to be in a position to even remotely beat Mark, you have to be consistent, and then when the time comes to maximize your speed against his, then you've built up that little, the kind of the groundwork, the foundations to really capitalize on that. And then also, conversely, when Mark makes a mistake, you've built up the groundwork to capitalize on that. So, of course, he's not going to be just going gung-ho, throwing the bike up the inside. I'd say with Bezzecchi as well in the Grand Prix. Bez pushed really hard, as we mentioned. But that's a second-place finish for an Aprilia team under a lot of pressure right now. You would be stupid to throw away a good, strong haul of points like that just for the off chance you might be able to possibly, maybe, perhaps get an overtake done on Marc Marquez.
Yeah.
People, I think, seem to have maybe just forgotten how racing works. This isn't going go-karting with your mates where you can just throw it up the inside and whatever happens, happens. Like, there's a lot more to it. So... Yeah, but as they've talked about, and as Mark's talked about as well, if you've got a bit of a lead, it's easier because you don't have to worry about the problems with the bikes. And then second of all, if you are in the lead, you're just a bit quicker, so you can manage things a bit better. And Mark was managing that. He was slower through the right-handers at Assen, but he then made sure his bike was in the right place going into the fast left at 15, into the chicane at 16, to stop an overtake happening. Bez, that was his strongest point of the circuit, and if Bez couldn't get anything done there, it's because Bez didn't have enough. Simple as that. So I think this whole kind of criticism that people, I think a lot of it is kind of unfounded. And yeah, I think Mark's probably right to say it's a bit disrespectful to his rivals. To suggest that Alex Marquez isn't pushing as hard as he can because it's his brother. It's disrespectful to Alex Marquez. It's disrespectful to say to Bez, "Oh, you should have tried an overtake." Well, I see you say that when you sat at home. It's like me sitting watching hockey and shouting, "Shoot the puck." So you say that when you sat at home, but when you're in the situation, speaking from experience playing recreational hockey, it's much easier to sit and watch someone try to score a puck than you would be in that position yourself. So, yeah, I think this whole kind of debate is sort of... It's a bit shit, really. I think it's kind of come out of nowhere, and I think it also is a bit disrespectful to the fact that Marc Marquez is just better than everyone right now.
Yeah, and that's what I say.
And that's it. That is the kind of the reality of the thing of this thing is that Marquez is better than everyone right now, and they know that, and they have been saying that. So it's on them just to try harder, and they know that themselves.
Absolutely, I think some people. I've just came out and said it. I'm not afraid to. Some people don't like hearing that Mark's the best, and it's like, well, what else do you want me to say? Oh, well, do you know he might be? It's like, as I've said, when he's won the amount of races he's done this year, and the mistakes that he has made, he is the only person that's beat himself. And I actually am going to say this: it's quite lucky that the fact he made those mistakes, because he'd be gone in this championship if he had have got the max points in. At Jerez and Coda. I personally think the gap would be just like, what's the point in watching Sachsenring, because he'd turn up and win a game probably. Yeah. But it's the point that people need to realise, as you say, these bikes are difficult to ride. The riders know it. It's a tough watch. The aerodynamics, the tyre pressures, and just to add, there's no new tyre coming for 2026, what I remember that. So it's another year. Yeah, thumbs down. It's another year essentially until the new regulations. We're going to have similar races. So we all don't want this, but it's the hand we have at the minute, and we just have to deal with it. And we will get good races, I'm convinced of that. There will be some good races this year. It's just a shame when you get to the iconic venues.
Yeah.
And they're not delivering, as you said. A good point, Lewis, about the 2018 race having 150 plus overtakes, and then you get to this year and it's like, well, there's the race done by halfway, and you're like, well, this is just the reality. But it will get better, trust me, folks. Just a bit of patience. And yeah, I think that it's not that bad, surely. It's not as bad as we're making it out. There still is entertaining elements of each weekend, and I hope that people realise that too, you know?
It was a tense Grand Prix. Like that, it was a tense
Yeah.
Grand Prix. You had 4 or 5 riders up there really in close proximity, and there was a lot of to and fro. And really, it was one of those ones where any small mistake would change the complexion of the race. And that, you know, I would rather see more overtakes, but also sometimes in racing, that is the race you get, and that's still interesting. Like, you know, people watch football and you get 0-0 draws, but you can still have a tense kind of game, you know. So I think it is the reality right now. It's not a great reality, but it is. And but within that, just because it's harder to race, you know, you look back to an era when it was easier to race, 2019, and look what we saw then with Marc. So
same result.
You know, well, exactly. So there, you do kind of just have to at some point just accept that the rider is the rider, and he's a hard rider to beat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose I think we can touch on Alex Marquez just to confirm more about the injury. It was an unlucky incident, to be honest. It was just one of those things, and Pedro Acosta they were just racing with each other, and Alex was in the wrong place, and just the front brake, the way it goes at that point of the circuit. Very lucky he didn't have other injuries. I mean, his left hand it's a metacarpal, and I think that surgery tonight, I think it is, that Grassini said, or tomorrow morning, whatever. He'll start recovery straight away for Sachsenring. And sorry to break the news to Alex, yeah, it's not his right hand, but he's going to a place where it's left-handers pretty much the whole way around, and that'll be a real tough thing physically. I think that, yeah, 68 points, that's a real tough break, isn't it, Lewis, for him? Just as he was consistently still being there and keeping the pressure on Marc every single race, but now it's his first real mistake, isn't it, of the season?
Yeah, it was unfortunate. I mean, the race didn't really go how we kind of expected it to for Alex from the start. Before that incident with Pedro Acosta, we, you know, from what we saw in the sprint, we were like, yeah, okay, that's more like it. But just from the off, he just didn't look comfortable. There was a couple of times he came out the chicane and he was sort of on the wrong line, and it was a bit easy prey for people like Pecco and Bez. And yeah, an unusual one. I'd like to kind of understand a bit more there from Alex as to what was wrong at the start of the race. Was it tyre pressure? Was there a problem with a tyre? That's not unheard of.
Yeah.
And yeah, the incident with Pedro was it was an unfortunate. Tried up the inside at turn 5, bit of rubbing, and then they were still kind of connected as they went. There's a bit of a change of direction on the exit to go into the back straight, and the Grassini data shows that Pedro kind of unwittingly pressed in Alex's brake lever. So it's one of those ones, as it happens, there's not really a lot you can do about it. Even with the brake protector, like, it will only protect so much. And yeah, it was an unfortunate one. Could have been worse, as you say, Jordan. Absolutely. He's going to have surgery on it. Grassini, I think, have already kind of hinted that maybe they aren't going to rush him back for Sachsenring, because Michele Massini, the team boss, said, look, first and foremost, what I'll say to him is that you come back when you are ready, when you are, you know, we want to restart from where we are now, which is back at the top. So they want to bring him back and for him to wobble around. And you're right, I think with the 6 to 8 point gap in the championship, that is it kind of over now. I think they know that, and I think Alex Marquez knows that as well, that on any given day, if he's beaten Marc will either be behind him or not far away. And there's not going to be a big point swing there. So I do wonder as well, when you think that this stage of the championship now, it's a week off, double header. You know, we've got the summer break coming up, but every race now to the end of the season is a double header. And if I was Grassini, I would be looking at Bruno as being a better opportunity at a good result, because we haven't been there since 2020. And Marc hasn't been there since 2019 either. So it's a level playing field, and I think the GP24, when you get to these newer circuits and newer surfaces and stuff, does tend to be a bit more competitive, because it's a more developed bike, so they can just hit the ground running and go for it. You know, you think back to Argentina, where we hadn't been there for a couple of years, and Alex Marquez was generally the quickest of those Ducati riders all weekend. So I would look at that. Basically now I think they're in a point of try and protect second in the championship.
Yep.
Try and keep going for those top results that they have been getting. And yeah, rushing them back for Germany just doesn't make sense, especially if it's going to go the way that we think it will in Germany, which is a Marc Marquez walkover, that is. So yeah, it's unfortunate for Alex because he has ridden brilliantly, and Mark did point this out as well, that he wants him back because he's ridden that bike in such a good way, that he has been such a good title rival. And yeah, it is unfortunate, but that is unfortunately the way racing goes.
Yeah, it is. It was a bruising weekend for the Gresini team, also with Fermin Aldegar crashing out of the Grand Prix. Very lucky incident. Unlucky and lucky in the same thing, that he didn't get hit by Joan Mir in that sense too.
I'd like to understand a bit more about that crash as well, because it happened at exactly the same place. He had a massive slide in practice.
Yep.
And I just wonder if that emboldened him somewhat to the point where he thought he could really push the limits through there, because it was an identical kind of moment where the last time I would say the bike didn't grip, so he managed to make it round, but this time it did. So I just wonder how much of that was maybe a bit of a rookie kind of thing of, oh, well, I'm really quick through here, so I can really push the limits here, and just got through it. But he was lucky. Joan Mir was lucky. Fabio Quartararo was lucky / unlucky, I guess, to depend on your point of view, because he was right behind that, had to take avoiding action, but it then dropped him a whole load of positions as well. So, yeah, an unfortunate one for Gresini, and hopefully they can bounce back pretty quickly and get back on top, because generally that lineup has been really, really strong this year.
Yeah, they've arguably, well, I would easily say probably the second best team, really, when you look at the course of the season.
And arguably the most surprising as well, because I think before the start of the season, we knew Alex Marquez was going to be good, and in our preview podcast, I put him up there as a top 3 championship. I think we all did actually put him up there as a top 3 championship contender, but Aldegar has been the most surprising, and the consistency that the two Gresini riders have shown as well, I think has maybe been the most surprising thing as well. So yeah, you do feel for that outfit that's a small team that really is punching well above its weight, and we like to see that, so let's hope both riders are fit and healthy as soon as possible.
And just to point out, I just realised it's 58 points that Alex Marquez has over Pecco Bagnaia, so Alex has a bit of a buffer there, and like you say, he can't afford to miss Germany, but then, as you said, Gresini pointed out they want him back when he is ready, so we'll have to wait and see for that one. Aprilia we'll focus on now, Lewis. I think we can touch on both sides. Bezzecchi was outstanding. I kind of tipped him up the podcast you didn't do on Monday. I thought he would have a podium chance. I was really surprised that he was that fast, because at one stage I thought he was going to win the Grand Prix today, because I thought he had enough to beat Marc. But he is just, I think he's took a lot of confidence from that win at Silverstone, and it's continued. The step that he made at the Aragon test, I think, was a big thing. He seemed to fix a lot of his qualifying one-lap issues, it seems. And he's a genuine threat now, I think, each weekend, if he can qualify and just consistently do what he does. Yeah, it was a brilliant weekend for him. He was probably rider of the week behind Marc. Or do you think it also stands in the off-track stuff? As I said in the intro, why does this keep happening that Bezzecchi performs when Martin's the centre of attention? It's all getting a bit messy off track as well, isn't it? Yeah,
it's a bit funny, isn't it? Well, first of all, on Bezzecchi, the qualifying improvements do look to be the main thing, because we have seen all season that the race pace has been good.
Yep.
So it's not really been a case where Aprilia has been missing in both areas, that the race pace has always been strong, the qualifying has always let them down. He was 5th on the grid. Was he 5th on the grid?
Yes, he was.
Yes, he was 5th on the grid. So that's a much better step forward already, and he used that to launch into the podium in the sprint, and then again in the Grand Prix. And clearly, he's a lot of confidence when that bike has stability, that he can have the confidence he needs. And Aprilia were a bit wary of being like, all right, we're here now. We've found the problems. They want to go to Sachsenring and see if that's the same. Yeah. The same thing. But if they have really truly figured out that qualifying thing, then this should start being a more regular occurrence for Bezzecchi, because he's been good. The bike has been good. It probably is the second best bike on the grid at this stage of the season now. If we look at the way KTM, Yamaha, Honda's developed since those early races, I think confidently we can say that the Aprilia is up there. So that's good. Bez continuing to kind of fly the flag for the team, really, which I think has maybe been a surprise as well because, this Bez's speed was never in doubt kind of coming into this, but I always had the doubt in my mind that we've seen him be really fast on the best bike. And then when the Ducati wasn't so good last year, he really struggled. And I did wonder on a bike that isn't the Ducati, that rides quite differently to the Ducati and in a factory setting, is that really the best thing for Bez? As it happens, yeah, it is. So, I'm very happy to be proven, not wrong on it, but I'm very happy to be proven that Bez...
It's good to see, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So that there's that. The off-track stuff, the Jorge Martin stuff, kind of went quiet for a few weeks, but now, we had this explosive interview from Martin's manager, Albert Valero, on the World Feed on Saturday, where he said Martin is free for next year. Well, he said Martin is free for next year, but then also sort of said that, this is what we're working for. So it was quite a contradicting interview, and it contradicted with what Martin's own statement was after Silverstone, when he said... He said his intention is to leave, but he hopes that Aprilia will honour the contract. So, this is what's been really confusing about, is we've had so many mixed messages even from within that Martin camp. Aprilia stand firm. They're like, nope, he has a contract for next year. And they're now starting to get a little bit more aggressive with it, let's say, because they're like, if we have to take this to the courtroom, we will. They're adamant that they have a contract legally binding for next year. They're adamant that this contract clause is nullified by presumably Martin not being on the bike all year. I think you wouldn't make these statements as a team who you have to assume that Aprilia are being legally counselled at this point on how to handle this matter. You wouldn't come out and make these comments publicly if you were not confident that if it did get to a court battle that you would win that. And having listened to what Massimo Rivola said on Sunday about this and making those very comments, and then kind of going back to what Valera said on Saturday, it almost does come across that Valera's statements were very much a plea rather than, an affirmation that this is what's happened. And it was almost like, we have the contract has to be respected, we wanted to negotiate to extend the performance clause, but that hasn't happened. It sort of sounds to me like, maybe right now the Aprilia is the one here that has that slight kind of advantage, let's say. For all that to happen on another weekend where Bez is fighting for a Grand Prix victory, was second, was very competitive throughout the weekend. As Massimo Rivolta said pre-race, Jorge signed for us for performance reasons, and we believe we've shown that. Yeah, you can't really deny that, and Martin is going to find it a lot harder to start kind of denying that this bike isn't competitive. Bez is sixth right now. He is 14 points, 15 points behind Digia in fifth. But we believe that the original performance clause was that Aprilia had to be in the top 5 in the championship by the French Grand Prix. So if you assume that there's a performance clause which can be extended to September, October, and Bez is in the top 5, which I wonder how confident this Martin camp are going to be about that now. Aprilia are kind of proving their point, and the fact that they're willing to take this to a courtroom is an interesting development. One has to view that as being a public test for Martin and Valera to kind of accept the contract. Equally, it puts the ball back in their court. It's calling their bluff. So let's see what happens next. There is obviously then what happens in the future if this does go to a courtroom and Aprilia wins. Then you've got a rider forced to ride in a contract he doesn't want to be there with.
Yeah.
And as I've said before, you've then got this situation where the team has to travel all around the world, be away from its family for so long, to really bust its ass to build this bike and to rebuild bikes that have been crashed and to keep developing at the factory for a rider that didn't want to be there in the first place. That's That's a big ask for your team.
It is.
It's very much like, sticking in a relationship you don't want to stick in because of the kids. That's when resentment builds up, and that's, we saw that at Yamaha with Vinales when he wanted to quit, so he quit the contract. But clearly he still wasn't happy at all. The team weren't really satisfied with, it wasn't a good atmosphere, and then it got to a point where obviously Maverick did something stupid and got himself kicked out.
Yeah.
It was the same with Zarco at KTM. KTM kicked him out because they didn't like the atmosphere it was bringing around. So that's then what the future is. How do you kind of reconcile that? Aprilia, to its credit, has always said, because it's everything I asked them, if, okay, you prove to Jorge he signs, but can you sort of trust him to really put his all into it? And they were like, look, first things first, let's get him back on the bike. And that's all they've really been caring about, is let's get him back on the bike, let's get him healthy, back on the bike, let's deal with this thing. And then our preference is that he stays here next year. We want him here next year. We want him to race with us next year. Aprilia has to take a lot of credit here for being really professional. And that's not something you could have said about Aprilia maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago. There was a lot of times when that wasn't really a good... Aprilia didn't handle these things very well. Now they have. And yeah, you've got to give them credit for that. What happens next? Interesting. Beyond all this...
What about Honda, though? That's my next question. Alberto Puig is just getting pestered every weekend, and he keeps saying the same sort of thing. He knows the situation, and Alberto knows the game completely. He understands how it is. He's a professional in that. Honda are in a really difficult spot, because he did say today, we can wait. But it's also at the point, as you say, how long is this going to drag on for? And then Honda are going to go, well, actually, we can't wait, sort of thing.
Well, there's that as well, but there's how long do the riders hold on? Because you've got a couple of riders out of contract, Marini and Zarco, who would be maybe potentially grabs for one of the seats available. Marini, for example, probably finds himself with a VR46 ride if he does leave Honda, possibly. I'd find it hard for Valentino Rossi's half-brother not to end up on Valentino Rossi's bike. Let's be real. Let's be real about that.
That'd be an awkward Christmas dinner, that one, if that didn't happen.
Zarco we think is going to stay at LCR, but if this whole thing drags on and he's still being told, okay, we can't sign a contract yet because we need to know how much we're going to be paying Martin, etc. At what point does he, to look at other things? Maybe, he's proven he can ride a satellite Honda and factory surrounding really well. Maybe there's a Yamaha opportunity. Maybe he's like, okay, maybe I go back there. Who knows? Just speculating here. This is not really based on anything other than... But they don't have an infinite amount of time, because these riders will want answers. And again, Honda deserves a lot of credit, because Alberto Puig has been asked about this a lot, and he said, Aprilia and Martin need to sort this out first before we do anything. And a lot of people, I put out a tweet on Sunday being like, kind of a bit of a jokey one. Remind me why you would pick a Honda over an Aprilia. And people are like, oh, it must be money. If no deal has been offered, then it can't be money.
Exactly.
But it can't also be the technical package, because it's not better than the Aprilia. So, there's this element of it that needs to be cleared up. The going back, the one thing we're not speaking about through all this, and it's the thing I'll talk about a bit more in the feature I'm going to write, Marco Bezzecchi is only doing himself favours by this, because contract negotiations are going to be coming up very, very soon, start of next year for 27. I assume whatever contract he is on is a fraction of what Martin is on. He will not be on very much money at all. And now he's kind of proven, okay, guys, I've gotten the wins, I've gotten the results, I've done the development, I've led this team through a really shit situation.
Yep.
Time for some money. And, then that's going to be like, if Martin then comes back, finds a bike, he really enjoys it, and it's like, okay, I want to stay for 27. Okay, well, we're not going to give you the contract that we gave you the first time around, because, first of all, you haven't shown, after all this, come on.
Yeah.
Secondly, Bez has done a really good job, so we need to pay him. So Mez has put himself into a great position, because come 27, there will be a few manufacturers looking at that going, we'd quite like him. Aprilia will be like, we want to keep him. That will be priority number one for them.
Yeah.
So then Bez, all of a sudden, if he carries on doing what he's doing, becomes a real big kind of, let's say second tier sort of rider market piece behind your Marcs and Pecos and Quartararos, those
Yep.
and Pedro Acosta as well, those really big names. Bez becomes a really, really good number 2 option if you're a team that's managed to select one of those kind of top superstar names. So yeah, this is the interesting thing, is that Bez is putting himself into a short window here, both to get himself a great Aprilia contract next time, but also to maybe get interest from elsewhere. So, you know, that's for me is maybe one of the more interesting elements of this whole thing right now, and one to keep an eye on as the season goes on.
Yeah, it is, because Bezzecchi, as you say, his not respect goes up within the team. I imagine it's already been so high, but it's like, I think that whole, when you sign Martin, you think he's our leader. Well, all of a sudden, that thing that Elisa Spargo said, last year, Martin's the next captain. Well, I think the next captain's an Italian fella now. So it is, that's what I think. I think it's Marco Bezzecchi. So
Bez has proven, above all, the thing that really a manufacturer kind of covets the most, and that is a rider that bleeds for the manufacturer that they ride for. And you know, the way he's handled this situation, because he's been asked a lot about it, and he's been like, look, I love Aprilia loves me, we're doing our best, you know, all this stuff in the background is not a big deal. You know, he could say one way though, because we know the two of them don't really like each other, and Bez hasn't been afraid to run his mouth before, and I'm quite surprised that he hasn't taken the opportunity to take a couple of digs here at Martin yet. But he's handled it in such a professional way and gone about his business, and to the betterment of Aprilia, and that's really going to earn him a lot of favours in the next contract cycle.
Yeah, it will do. And just what I think I'm right in saying, Aprilia are planning, if Jorge Martin is given the all clear to be fit, I think he's going to do a test at Bruno or Misano, I think, isn't it? It's
yes,
one of those two.
As part of the regulation that they pushed through for Jorge Martin's benefit before he decided to, you know, do what he did. So, you know, that's the next thing, is he's going to have to go and do this test designed specifically for him, pushed for by Aprilia, to maybe the detriment of Massimo Rivola's relationship with some other manufacturer bosses, and kind of putting Aprilia in a position where it will have to go along with something else in the future, given that everyone went along with that for this test. So, you know, that's going to be interesting.
To any of our UK listeners, I don't know if you get it, even outside of the UK, there's these things called like soap dramas at Coronation Street and like sort of EastEnders. I tell you, MotoGP in 25 with Aprilia, it beats everything. Any sort of soap drama, nothing compared to this, because I think it's the storyline that just, it surprises me every week. I hear something new and I'm like, oh, the drama with the contracts, like Bezzecchi just is like it's just the little factor in the middle of it all. It's just perfect.
It's
so
real telenovela stuff, isn't it?
It's really
in Latin
good.
countries.
So it is. And Joe, what? I like it. So I wish MotoGP had a TV style Netflix series, because it'd be perfect for it. But you know, we'll get into that when the Liberty deal is announced, which should be next week. So yeah, we'll cover that in more detail. Just finally, Lewis, like Fabio Quartararo, we kind of touched on his weekend, kind of what could have been. Difficult for Yamaha, because he's clearly, when you look at the numbers solely, the gaps that he has to the other Yamaha riders in qualifying is alarming. But even in a race, say for the sprint yesterday, the pace he was running compared to the other Yamahas, it's night and day.
Yeah.
And probably without that sort of incident today with Aldiger having to run off the track, he would have been clear of that group of Yamahas. But it's not good in terms of the depth that Yamaha have. You've got this diamond, and then it's like the rest are just kind of below. And it's a shame, because I thought Jack Miller would have been a lot faster, but Jack's kind of struggled the past few weekends, and it's difficult for Yamaha.
Just at the wrong time as well, when he is the rider that is the most at risk of losing his place from next year. You know, Fabio, the one lap pace that Yamaha is incredible, and even Marc, there was a behind the scenes video, he's like, man, I don't know how you do that. And it is impressive, and the pace in that Yamaha is really good, but as we saw in both races, and Fabio touched on this on Sunday, there just isn't the same pace isn't in the bike at the start of races. And this is kind of not a new thing, because you remember back to the Vinales days, it was always a thing he said, was like, the pace at the start of the race isn't great, but when I get going, second half of the race, I'm as fast as anyone else, but by that point I've dropped too many positions and you can't overtake on this bike. And for a long time we kind of went, all right, Maverick, right, okay, you know, But it's kind of come back around again, and Fabio dropped right off kind of the start of the race. I honestly thought he had a problem to begin with because it looked like he was just losing times hand over fist, and then the pace picked up again. But by that point, obviously there was the moment with Aldegate, but he was cast too far adrift, and then trying to overtake on a Yamaha is too hard. So I think we did expect this to be a bit more like Silverstone, and I think they did as well. And the pace certainly suggested that coming into the weekend after Friday, that was like a Silverstone kind of esque thing was on the cards there. So yeah, there's clearly a lot of work to be done there. But I do fundamentally believe the biggest problem Yamaha has right now and beyond is this depth issue, because the rest of the Yamaha stable simply isn't good enough right now. Alex Rins hasn't been quick enough. Jack Miller hasn't been quick enough, since the early kind of part of the season. And Oliveira he's had injuries, but Oliveira's speed hasn't been there for a long time in MotoGP, not just at Aprilia, not just at Yamaha, sorry. And if you look at the championship, it's 5 Ducatis in the top 5 in the championship. Yeah. The gap between Marc and Pecco in some ways is exaggerated because there has been an extra Ducati in the way of them in Alex Marquez. Yeah. So if you are to go up against Ducati, you need to have a proper armada.
You need a team. You need two people to challenge it.
KTM kind of has that with Vinales and Acosta. They're the kind of consistently the top guys. They were 4th and 5th in the race. So, that at Assen. So that kind of proves that. Aprilia, in theory, that was supposed to be Martin and Bez. But, Aprilia has that problem a little bit, but we've seen flashes of speed from Agura that you think next year maybe that becomes exactly. Honda kind of, have got sort of a similar issue, but, Zarco and Mir, when he finishes, there is talent there. Yamaha, if they give Fabio a good bike, fine. But that's still going to be really hard to defend. One of the things that really helped Fabio build up such a massive lead at Silverstone was the fact that Jack Miller was able to put himself up the front early. So he was holding off Ducatis and stuff like that and allowing Fabio to run his lines and bolt away. That's the kind of thing you need. You need a really strong kind of second rider to be up there consistently all the time to be able to run interference, essentially. So your top guy can go away. And then if they make a mistake, then that second place rider could pick up the pieces, and that's the way it needs to be. But Yamaha doesn't have that, and I think that has to be one thing that they do look at for certainly in the short term, depending on for whatever happens with Pramac. But certainly for 27, if Fabio does stay, we know there's going to be Toprak, but he's a real unknown right now, and I wouldn't even want to sit here and go, oh yeah, he'll be mega, he'll be a front runner, because I just in my heart right now can't confidently say that given all the variables involved.
Yeah.
But they need to find a couple other riders. They need to find a replacement for Alex Rins, who is faster than Alex Rins and can, be up there with Fabio. And they need to find someone whether it's a young rider that they can really develop, like Ducati's doing with Aldegate, someone like that. But they need a bit more depth because, Fabio can't go on trying to fight all these wars himself. The problem they'll have, though, is that if Fabio does stay, it'll probably have to be on a bigger contract than he's on right now, which then probably leaves a lot less wiggle room for Yamaha to then sign the necessary backup. So it's a bit of a catch-22, but the depth issue is something that does need to be sorted, because going forward it is going to start causing more problems,
Yeah.
And that's not new for Yamaha either. When Fabio won in 2021, he was the top Yamaha. The rest of them were nowhere. Even in the Rossi era before Lorenzo came along, he was the only one winning races on a Yamaha. The rest of them weren't. Yeah. Depth was a problem then. So, this is a long kind of standing problem that Yamaha does need to sort, because it has been a long time since we've seen a really good roster of riders at Yamaha. You're going back to like 2019 when you had Fabio, Rossi, Vinales, Morbidelli when he was at his peak, really. So they need to try and recapture that somehow, as well as push the bike forward. But they are up against it, trying to convince Fabio to stay, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. just thought back to that. I'm trying to think when the last non-Yamaha win was without Fabio. I think it was Vinales, wouldn't it have been in 21? So
yeah, the first round.
yeah,
Qatar.
yeah. So there you go. It's like, geez, that's 4 and a bit years ago, and that's like Yamaha haven't won a race since 22 at Sachsenring when that was Fabio's last win. You're thinking, geez, that's 3 years ago coming, and it's like that needs to change. And I think that the depth thing's spot on, so it is. But who knows? I don't have a clue what's going to happen with Yamaha, to be honest. Like, I think they're doing the right things, but it's time. And are we going to get a Marquez style situation with Quartararo where he sees his career and he's like, I could be winning here, or challenging for titles? And he's like, I don't want to wait anymore. And I sense that, yeah, the next year and a bit, maybe the next year, is the most crucial part of this relationship, whether it's going to continue or not. So
yeah,
we'll see how that develops, really. I think that's really the key, isn't it? If Fabio's going to be committed to the project, or does he want to go somewhere else?
They need to convince him that they have a winning project, and they haven't right now. You know, he came very close at Silverstone, but like that.
Do you think if he wins at Silverstone, it changes his mentality?
I think it probably does, because then he's done it. But that was his only opportunity so far. We've gotten to another track at Assen where we thought things were going to be better, and they weren't. So, yeah, I do think that win at Silverstone would have changed a lot. Much in the same way, I think that podium at Qatar would have changed a lot for KTM. You know, there's a lot of these variables that when results go one way, it does change the complexion of things quite a lot. Because fundamentally, you get those results, you get confidence. That's what we're seeing with Bez. You get those results, you start getting the confidence. And I think Fabio's confidence is really being tested by, you know, I've committed to Yamaha maybe longer than I should have done. Max Bartolini's keeping me here because I want to see what he can do, but the bike isn't taking the steps forward it needs to be. And he knows that he will be a sought after piece. There will be a good bike on the grid for him in 27, and like we've said already, those contracts will be signed January, February time next year. So really it's 6 months. Yamaha has to get this V4 on track and prove that it can be an immediate step forward straight away to really convince Fabio, or else someone will come along with a contract and go, do you fancy it? And if it's the right offer, the right bike, he might go, yeah, I think I do, because he's given enough to Yamaha now. And that's the thing, he's won a championship with him, and then he's stayed even though the performance has dipped, when he could have been on an Aprilia this year, which is a bike that has won races. And I think that'll be something weighing on his mind as well this weekend. He'll be looking at Bez and he'll be thinking, you know, I could have been on that bike, and I would have treated Aprilia a bit better than Jorge Martin has, who was ultimately, Fabio turned them down because they couldn't offer more than about 4 million. Martin comes along, they find more money to pay him. Yeah. And, you know, so there's, you know, I do think Fabio will be looking at it and going, you know, maybe next time, maybe when contracts come around again, maybe that might be the place to go, and maybe as they've seen what's happened, maybe we can get a deal over the line that suits me. So, yeah, next 4 or 5 months really is crunch time for Yamaha.
Absolutely. I'm really kind of intrigued to see how this plays out over as you say, the next half a year. I'm really key eye on that, actually. So let's see what happens with Fabio and Yamaha. Yeah, that's it for the podcast. Week off, thank God. To be honest, I've seen so many things for the past 2 weeks. I just want a break from it. And Marc Marquez, as I say, 68-point lead heading to the Sachsenring, where I think he's won 12 races or so, 11 races in total. Just something ridiculous. So probably, we'll talk a lot about Mark and how he's going to go around Sachsenring in the next week. Like to say, building up to the Liberty Media deal to be officially confirmed. I think it's no later than the 3rd of July. So we'll have stuff on that on the website and across social media and the YouTube channel as well. And if you're lucky, we might get a podcast out of it too. So other than that, like, subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Leave a comment on what you thought of the weekend at Assen. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, 5-star review helps out massively. And we'll see you next time. Take care.